Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. 2008 has come and gone, and now we're facing the possibility of a whole new administration coming into office. The question is, just before that happens, are we going to hear some bad news where all of a sudden they're going to be asking the American public for $700 billion to bail out a financial industry that basically caused the problem in the first place? Homes being lost, jobs being lost, savings and everything else disappearing. We find it more troubling than ever that we need to protect our money, but sometimes we wonder, is that even possible? Even more incredible is the emotional state that we find ourselves in when it comes to the issue of money. Believe it or not, when it comes to relationships and money, those are the things that really dig up sort of the dirt and the skeletons, if you will, of the true natures of who we are. On the program today, we're going to be talking about financial recovery and our emotional state of how we think and deal with money itself. We want to develop a healthy relationship with money, and that's exactly what our guest today is going to be talking about. I'd like to welcome to the program today our guest, author of the book Financial Recovery, Ms. Karen McCall. Karen, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here.
Now, what got you started on this path? This is always one of those interesting topics, especially when you talk about the emotion of money, and our relationship to it. Some have a great relationship with it, and they love it, and some just, oh, man, I can't stand it. I can't believe the whole world is about money. It's just you get such contrasting attitudes. Tell us about that.
Well, if you wanted me to tell you how I started, I will just describe myself 27 years ago. I had a big secret. No one knew the true situation of my financial situation. I was a successful-looking businesswoman. I had a fantastic office in San Francisco's financial district. If you'd have seen me, you'd have thought, wow, what a success. However, at home on top of my refrigerator, I had this big bowl of unopened bills, and no one would have guessed that I was on the brink of financial ruin and that I had absolutely no idea what to do, and I was keeping it completely to myself. I just was suffering in silence. It was really impacting me on an emotional, spiritual, and certainly financial way.
Well, there's no doubt about the getting up every day. You try to have the enthusiasm to move in the right direction, and the next thing you know, as you said, you face that mailbox, you get that letter, and you go, okay, where did I slip here? What's going on with my thinking here?
Right. Well, in my case, one of the things that had happened is I had, a couple of years before that, had a significant amount of money following a divorce. And again, because I just had no clue, I just watched my assets go down and my debt go up. And when I started my own process, I found that there was very little help out there. And so the good news is that this eventually, after a few years, led me to the business of being a financial recovery counselor and developing a process for people to develop a healthy relationship with money and a sustainable relationship with money so that we can ride out the waves. And it was so clear as I dug into the process for myself and then working with clients that, yes, there's the dollars and cents of it all. We want to be smart about money. However, there are so many subconscious drivers to our behaviors with money that it's very important to bring those into our consciousness so that we understand what's going on and then we really have an opportunity to do something about it.
Agreed. Now, I understand a lot of times, and this is something that I've heard, and I've even read this in books, that a lot of times we learn about money through our parents. Now, that's fair enough. Let's just say that we've developed our money habits based on what our parents did, whether they're good or bad. But really, you got to get to a point when you become an adult to say, okay, probably I've followed these patterns, good or bad, but you've still got to take personal responsibility for the state that you're in.
You are absolutely right. I've had so many people say to me that
it's my parents' fault. They never taught me about money, and that's why I'm broke. And it's like, well, you're earning the money. You're just as responsible for it as anybody.
Well, however, a lot of people don't recognize that some of those early messages that they got about money, as I said before, they're unconscious. And I've had people say that it feels so good when they get to that point where and I've had many people say this, I like becoming a grown-up with money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they move from that role of, I'm powerless, I can't do anything about it, I don't know about money, to really taking charge and saying, I'm going to get smart with money, and I am going to understand if there was stuff going on in my childhood that helped me develop this belief system that I keep sabotaging myself.
Now, let's talk about the financial relationship, the emotional relationship. What are some of the common financial mistakes that you see people making besides not having a budget and perhaps, of course, overspending, kind of having money as though they hated it?
Well, I think that some of the things that people do is they don't realize that they're living in a state of deprivation. And, our basic needs are really important. And so a lot of people focus on, they know they have this sense of emptiness, but they want the immediate gratification. And so we certainly do have the overspenders. And we have people that are, as I was, not connected to their money, not conscious of the fact that they're spending money. So even if they do a budget, they're not going to be able to stick to it. And so what I found is that for people to get conscious, to become connected, that starting to track their money, it sounds so simple, and I cannot tell you how many people, to this day, I still do it myself, write down everything they spend. And this gives them information about, oh my gosh, I'm spending money and I don't even feel good about spending this. And that in and of itself sometimes will stop the behavior. And then other people say, if I had to write it down, I didn't want to spend it. But then it does give people data so that they can do a plan and they can, again, see, am I meeting my needs? Am I doing what's really of value to me? Or am I compromising and sabotaging my behavior because I'm so disconnected from my money?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the biggest mistakes, is that people aren't tuned into what their true needs are. They don't know how to distinguish the difference between wants and needs. And so they're driven by this sense of deprivation. But there's also under-earning. I mean, there's a lot of things that can show up, behaviors that can show up beyond just overspending. There can be, the under-earning, people who are unemployed. All of this can come from this sense of, I'm not enough, I don't feel good enough. And so people will create the outside to match the inside. So if they don't feel worthy, if they don't feel strong and smart about money, that can be a reality that they create in their lives without even realizing that they're a part of the problem.
You bring up something that I think is really important for our listeners out there, and that is that people tend to take money and identify and create their identity by that. And, when you talk about self-worth, you have somebody that probably, say, earns $10,000 to $15,000 in a year, and sure, that's poverty level, versus somebody that's at $100,000 a year. But really the interesting thing is, and I've heard this pretty consistently, between the two, there is really no real degree of happiness. It's not that greater from one to the other. And in fact, just recently we were doing a segment that was talking about, for instance, affluence, that there are more suicides in the richer communities than there are in the poorer ones. And I thought, that's pretty interesting.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'd love to find that statistic, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised. I've worked with people who have a lot of money, and, the same issues can be present for anyone struggling with money. The numbers may be higher for the rich, but the emotional toll is the same for everyone. And when you said, gee, it can drive people to suicide, it shows you what an emotional toll, and that their sense of worthiness was attached to their money. I was talking to a man who did an interview with me the other day. He was filming it, and he said that it didn't matter whether he had $25,000, if he was earning $25,000 or if he was earning $250,000, that he would create the same situation. It's just, again, more zeros, but he still found himself without enough.
Huh.
And so I think that substantiates exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. I know that when you say that and that reality, what's really interesting about that is when you talk about never having enough. And then there's also the other side of the coin where people have too much and they don't know what to do with it. For instance, I was told at one time that people who tend to save money for a lifetime for retirement, they get to the end and they've got this nice pile of money, but they got so used to the habit of doing it and the fear of loss, they tend not to go and do the things they wanted to do while they were saving it just because they're afraid of losing it.
Well, and you know, I think that's really true. And there's, you know, another aspect that I bring to it is that for a lot of people, they do deny themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be something that, you know, again, unless they're saying, oh, I want to have a healthy relationship, which means it's healthy if there's a balance between, you know, I matter, and people have done their homework, so they not only see where they are, but they also see where they're heading, and that they don't put their life on hold. And people put their lives on hold when, you know, or at least they attempt to, when they have a lot of debt. They think, oh, I can't do anything, or, gee, I have to have more for retirement. And that's going to have a negative consequence for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. The people who feel that they're going to put their life on hold until they're out of debt, so often it's a diet mentality, black and white thinking. How can you have a life while you're still in debt? If you go on a strict diet, you're going to fall off, and quite often then it sets up the binge. So it can do the very same thing with this. And so people come to the end of their life, and if they've never been able to, you know, take those vacations or give themselves the things that would give them some joy and happiness, it doesn't mean that they're magically, now that they're retired, going to be able to shift that whole mindset that they have about money. Mm. So it's really kind of tragic, because money is just a tool for us. What we really want to do is get to what's our sense of value? What do we value in the world? How do we live the most meaningful life, the most fulfilling life, and not confuse what money can do and what it can't do.
Karen, I wonder, in your experience, that when you take a look at the messages that are out there, whether it's on television, on the radio, and newspapers, we get information that's coming at us every which way but loose. It almost seems safer to stay asleep, and God knows they'll figure out some kind of a weird noise microwave that'll seep into your dreams and try to give you subliminal messages. You just never know. But that we sometimes, or maybe most of the time, as you said earlier, unconsciously make choices about our money based on keeping up with the Joneses, that ideal that we're not good enough and we need more. And you see that kind of nonsense happening constantly, especially when you consider the issue of the credit card.
Oh, boy, you've really named the magic thing. You know, when you talked
and
earlier...
this became big, and it was interesting. I wasn't aware of this, but I've been watching a lot of interesting documentaries over the years, that there was a time that Americans were generally pretty good stewards. You still had people that were in poverty and maybe overspent, but, you know, for the most part, they were fairly good stewards of money, especially coming out of the Great Depression. There were a lot of things in place, financial regulations that were, you know, put in place to protect people. You had Keynesian, economics, which was talking about the good of the greater whole rather than the one. And it's interesting because pretty consistently I've seen in a lot of these documentaries, it was the beginning of the Reagan administration that was the beginning of the end for government protection and the overspending and the ridiculousness that I think a lot of us have experienced today.
Well, Daniel, I remember, and I'm old enough to remember when credit cards just came out.
And that was back in the late 70s with the Discover card, wasn't it, with Sears?
Yes,
yeah.
Actually it was, and then I think there was Diners, but I was
in... Or Diners, one of those guys, yeah.
I was in London last year, and they had a money exhibit, and it showed the very first credit cards, and I do think it was a Discover. I can't remember for sure, but it was that whole history. But the reason I'm glad you touched on this is because whether we like it or not, plastic is here to stay, or something like that, where, casinos have known for years, decades, that if you get people to change their cash, or put it on their credit card or whatever, but get chips when they're gambling, what they do is they disconnect people from the reality that this is really money.
Right.
And so we're and like I said, it's here to stay, so it takes a bigger commitment for us to realize if we're not going to be a victim to this and so susceptible to those subliminal messages where the plastic, whether it, and it can be just your bank card coming right out of your checking account.
Oh, yeah.
The statistics still say that when people use plastic, they spend 23 to 30% more. And I've had people in my training program who train to become financial recovery counselors who have very healthy relationships with money. However, they were used to using their credit cards, and they would resist at the beginning this concept that it can be problematic for people, even people who pay it off every month, even people who have never carried debt. And I remember one person in particular who thanked me for persisting on her at least considering it and experimenting with not using credit cards for everything, because she was so caught up in the rewards that she got. She said, gosh, we've gotten a lot of things. But when she really started tracking, she realized when they went to, hey, I'm going to experiment with using cash, she did discover, oh my gosh, and she's in great shape financially, but she did realize that she was spending quite a bit more using that, and she wasn't even aware, and she didn't have negative consequences because of it. But again, it was that seduction of, and that's where psychology is used against us. Like you said, subliminal messages. Hey, they hire the best psychologists, to know how to get to us, and it starts so young with kids. That these, hey, if we get this thing, you're going to really fit in, and this brand, and then you're going to be cool. And I'm so thrilled that Sesame Street has decided this year to start teaching kids about money on Sesame Street. They're going to teach them how to save, spend, and share. I mean, how wonderful that hopefully there will be that kind of education for people, and even for parents watching Sesame Street, to realize, hey, we do have a responsibility to model for our kids and help our kids right from the get-go. So the credit cards it just adds to this disconnection that we have, and so we have to make a big commitment to overcome that.
Well, we really hope too that Sesame Street takes it even to a greater level, and this is one that really should be in schools and really should be in the mindset of parents, and that is how to make money work to earn more money. I mean, this is something that will work 24 hours a day, doesn't get sick, doesn't, take vacations, doesn't complain, and if you put it into motion, can be phenomenal.
Well, it's interesting. I know what you're talking about is you're talking about teaching them to save and invest.
Right.
And also, one of the things that I was thinking about the other day, I can remember when I left my corporate job and started my business, people thought I was nuts because at the time I was working for the second largest computer company in the world.
Wow.
And everyone said, you've got job security. And, by that point I had a company car and I had stock in the company. And here I am going to quit and go off and start my own business. And things have changed. I was raised by my aunt and uncle, and they both went to work for the county of Sacramento, and they stayed there for years, and they had their retirement parties and their pensions. But that's changed. That company that gave me all of that quote-unquote security, they've been gone for years.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I think a lot of people are looking at, kind of to expand on what you're saying, is also looking at the possibility of entrepreneurship. There's no such thing as job security the way it was when my parents were young. It's just not the same. Things have really, really changed, and I think we've seen that with this latest economic downturn.
Well, it hasn't existed for more than 20 years, that's for sure.
Right, and I was at a barbecue last Sunday, a couple Sundays ago, for my grandson's graduation, and there were two teachers there. One had just gotten her pink slip. One was told she has to change districts because she's been there 11 years. She's not a new teacher, but it's all the cutbacks. And then someone else who was employed went to work that Thursday and was told, hey, we have no more money. We have to let you go. And those of us who were entrepreneurs sitting there were going, oh, thank goodness. So,
right.
And I realize everyone's not going to become an entrepreneur, but I do think it's time for people to really look. If they have the belief system that, hey, if I go to work for a company that I'm set and I'm secure, I mean, there's no such thing as total security for any of us. We certainly know that. However, I think that there's a belief system that people really can benefit from looking at about, their job security. And then again, that adds to the importance of what you're talking about. Do we have money working for us? And in my book, Daniel, I talk about 3 different levels of savings because I think it's important for people to explore their relationship to saving. I know when I first started investing, when I got that first statement that showed that my investment was worth less than what I had put in, freak out. Freak out time. And so,
that actually happened to me, Karen, many years ago. I set up 2 savings accounts for my nieces with the intention that every year on their birthday I would put in, say, 20 or 30 or 50 bucks. So, and then by the time they were 18, I'd say, I know I've never given you a birthday card or a birthday gift or any of those kind of things, but I'm giving you a passbook savings account, and here's what's in it. Well, I didn't follow through on that, and here's one of the funny things about that stunk. Going to a bank to set up a savings account and getting a bill that says now I owe them $20.
Right. Because
how in the hell does that happen? I called. I said, hey, this is a savings account. How am I owing you money? And this is what she said. Oh, they set up the account wrong. Okay, so what are you going to do about it?
I know. Isn't that a shock? And so I encourage people to think about 3 levels of savings. Because, as a nation, we're not savers. And so I experimented with clients for years doing this, and I did it, and boy, I'll tell you it works. And I know that you just got my book, so you haven't had a chance to look at everything, but this chapter on saving your way out of debt, I talk about the 3 levels of savings so that we have a savings account for those non-monthly expenses, and this is a revolving savings account. This is one that we use for things that come up that are non-monthly. And even back to school, which will be here before we know it. I know school was just out, but September comes. And a lot of families are caught off guard because they have all of these back-to-school expenses. And if people feel guilty when they take money out of savings, this is a great way to say, oh, I've earmarked this for vacations, for back to school, for holidays, etc. The other thing that does is that's crucial for people to be able to stop digging a bigger hole of debt. So if you think about, okay, I have a debt hierarchy, and the first level of that is to stabilize our debt, not dig the hole any deeper. And the only way we can do that is if we are saving for our non-monthly expenses. Then if we move up and we look at savings and we say, okay, now we need a safety net savings for those of us who are entrepreneurs or those of us who are on commissions or we have seasonal work or the people who are employed who may be laid off, that's our safety net savings. That's what we want to save. That's the, okay, we're laid off, money's tight. That's the account that we save and protect unless we need it for income protection. And if we have those 2 things in place, that really supports our investment savings so that we don't have to take money out at inappropriate times and pay those extra fees and penalties and taxes because it wasn't our investments were not supported with a strong foundation. And so it can be painful for people to think about, oh my gosh, I'm going to be starting a savings account when I owe all this interest on my credit cards. And the reality is that people can stay stuck between, trying to stabilize their debt and trying to reduce their debt, and they may get out of debt once in a while, but they can't stay debt-free. However, if they've put this plan of savings in place, now they have a chance to do it. So, calculating the interest may freak people out, but a few more months of interest while you're stabilizing and setting up this periodic savings account can really make the difference for people to be able to stop that downward spiral of debt.
Karen, now, I remember some time ago I was told that when it comes to, let's say, emergency savings, for instance, now you want to, of course, have as much as you can, but I was told that this was an interesting number, too, that $500 was a very comfortable amount for a lot of people. When you think about it, most of our emergencies, barring, something catastrophic, are generally about that much or less.
Well, and you know what? I love that you brought this up because so many things that people call emergencies is just life happening. We have a car repair. Well, if we have an older car and it's not under warranty any longer, that's not an emergency. That's a life event. And so I think people do feel good having an amount knowing, oh, they have a car repair. they've got the money for it. They don't have to use the credit card. And so I encourage people not to think about those things as emergencies, but, life happens. Relatives get sick and die, and we have to hop on an airplane and go to their funerals or go to their bedside. Things happen, and we want to get away from the drama and crisis around it. And I'm glad you mentioned that for some, boy, your statistics are better than mine. I didn't know that.
Just try to make your book shine a little bit, Karen.
Yes, well, I'm glad you are. This is great. And I'll tell you why I like that you said that, because it reminded me of something that I think is worthwhile talking about. If people have never saved and someone tells them we need to save $10,000 or 20 or 30, we need to have 6 months or a year living expenses. People have never saved, you may as well tell them to fly to the moon. They're just going to shut down and it feels impossible.
Mm-hmm.
If they set a much more realistic goal, and maybe their goal is to have, like you said, the $500 for those unexpected things, or I would encourage people, hey, what about getting a month of your rent or mortgage saved? And then let's work at maybe, that and your utilities. And then what about, adding what a month of food would be, breaking it down, chunking it down so that people can start building on their success rather than just, oh my gosh, here's your goal, $10,000, and I've never been able to save $100, where then people stop before they even begin.
Now, Karen, here's the other thing, too, when you talk about saving and trying to have that little cushion that you're talking about. And I know I personally have experienced this myself. It seems like you're on your way. You have this cushion going on. You have a pretty much, a goal for certain things. And then something seems to come in that almost wipes all that out. Just as when things are going good, something bad happens. Mm-hmm. What about the emotional psychology behind that?
Well, when people are developing this multi-level let's see, I didn't say that very well, but they're developing this relationship on many levels, they're going to be more equipped to handle those kinds of things. For me, I have one of the things that I use, and I would just be lost without, is I do a spending plan every month, and I also have a spending plan for the year. And so when those things happen, yes, if I'm just running numbers in my head and I'm kind of freaked out, I can always go back to my spending plan and I can say, okay, what adjustments can I make? Okay, can I bring in more money? We get into possibility thinking and seeing the potential and getting curious. However, the tendency for someone when that happens is to kind of shut down and say, oh my gosh, look at this, it never works. And then they develop that defeatist attitude where, oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how often my clients would say, and I would have this feeling, my gosh, I'm supposed to be the expert. I'm sitting here working with them, and I can't even imagine what their solution is going to be. It looks so dismal, something that's happened. Mm-hmm. And when we're committed to a process of staying in touch and learning how to do these different things, solutions come for people that they could never imagine. Because, as I said, they've changed their mindset. They're saying, hey, I don't want to be a victim here. I want to be empowered. And so once we have those tools and we know that we can go back to them, that really helps. It's the same thing when people have a setback physically. And if they've had the experience in the past, okay, they've had surgery or they've had something that really knocks them down. They've had the experience before, they know, okay, there are things I have to pay attention to build my health back up and to build my strength back up. And so we want to have those same muscles. We want to develop those same muscles, mental muscle that says, okay, yes, I've been hit a blow. And I have tools now, and I also have explored my mindset, and I've changed a lot of my belief systems. I have a lot more confidence in myself and my process. So that's what I suggest, because we all have them. We all have these things in life that kind of knock us off of our feet. And how quickly can we get back on track?
Now, Karen, how do you see America as a whole getting back on financial track?
Oh my gosh, This morning when I was watching Good Morning America, I just couldn't watch it, when we say,
I don't blame you. Sometimes those day shows, it's like, where do you guys get your information? How do you live with yourselves when you actually produce it?
Oh, well, and you know that even people who are in good shape financially, when they watch that, I've seen statistics about this, that even people who have a lot of money will be impacted by these reports about how bad the economy is.
Right.
And so, gosh, I don't have any answers for, how to solve the national debt. However, I do believe, and you said something earlier in the show, I hope I can remember what it was, when you talked about people at one point were good stewards of their money, and they looked at, how was it you said it? You said they looked at something about the whole, I really liked what you said, at the whole picture of not just the individual. Do you remember what you said?
Oh, geez, I'm sure it'll come to me. We'll figure that out as we go along here.
When people were good stewards of money and oh, gosh. Well, that's how I want to respond to your question, is that, the greater good for all.
Okay, yeah, I was talking about Keynesian economics. It was the old way, and then they changed to a new one where they had some economists step in, and this was what the Reagan administration was guided by, and we seem to be going by it ever since, because just before Jimmy Carter went out of office, he was talking about the gravity of the situation and that how we need to start living within our means.
Yes.
He goes out of office. They get this idiot economist in there that says, no, spend. Go ahead and live today. Forget about tomorrow. And now look at us.
Well, and so it does always start with the individual. Mm-hmm. We need to arm ourselves with a lot of information, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I really see a ripple effect when people are taking care of themselves. It starts with the individual and then the families and the communities, and that's all people have control over right now. Even though I've been counseling people for 20 years and now I train people all over, to do this work, I think about Washington and I think, oh my gosh, would I hate to be there trying to solve that problem, and how do you meet everybody's needs, and how, oh my gosh, I mean, it is so complex. So I think, what can we do about ourselves, and then also to insulate ourselves. It doesn't mean turn off the news and don't know, we want to be informed and know what's going on. However, we also want to notice if it's impacting us in a really negative way, that now we go into fear mode rather than into smart mode, where we say, okay, yeah, things are tough. This is time to still be careful and, like you said, spend less than we make and save the difference, and not just completely shut down. I saw a statistic recently, and this was shocking to me. They said that millionaires did not feel that they were rich until they got to $7,500,000. That was the magic number for people being rich. And, when the economy tanked, there was a psychologist in Los Angeles who said his practice was busier than ever, and it was rich people. And maybe they lost $1 million or $2 million, but they still had plenty. However, they identified with people they were seeing on television who were losing their homes, who were losing their jobs, and so they went into a lot of anxiety and depression. And so that's what we want to. That's why there's no real security. Here's somebody with $7,500,000 and they don't feel rich.
My goodness. So
it's there's so much to it in terms of, can we create this sense that regardless of what happens, we can find creative ways to take care of ourselves?
I think that's so true, because when you take a look, for instance, there was a friend of mine I was talking with not too long ago, and for some reason the conversation came up, and I said, do you drive? And he says, no, I never even bothered to get my driver's license. I said, really? Tell me about that. He says, I just didn't want to hassle with doing that, of getting a car, worrying about it breaking down, this and that. He says, I just mainly take buses and cabs, and I find that that's just one less thing to worry about. And if you're living in the city, when you really think about it, how often does your car really actually move? It mostly just sits there. And I find that I started taking on, the idea, why don't I start with public transportation just to see what this is like? And I get around almost as easily. I mean, there's not as much convenience as jumping in the car, but I also find, too, but I spend a lot less money because I'm not jumping in the car going on these stupid little errands and stopping off in a restaurant for something to eat or whatever the case may be. And it's amazing how much money you actually save when you do something like that. So it's actually adopting, as you said, habits that you go, it's going to start feeling pretty good about saving money, and because you're not just kind of let it leak out of your hands.
Exactly. And I love what you said, because when I quit my company job and started my business, I had a company car, and so I went without a car for 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days.
Wow.
And I did give myself permission if it was late at night and I was at a bus stop and that didn't feel like the safest thing to do, I would take a cab, but mostly I took buses. Occasionally I would rent a car.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I remember buying this Gap jacket that had all these, pockets on it, so that I just made a game. I made it fun. Mm-hmm. I had a book to read, and I just used that time that I was on public transportation. And I'll tell you, one of the best dates I ever had was a date on public transportation. We're in San Francisco. We went to the Marina Greens and the Safeway and got a salad. It was a very romantic dinner. And so, again, it is, and some people, the idea of giving up a car. Now, I live out in the country, so there's no way I would be able to not have a car now. At that time, I was living, in San Francisco, and I had buses right outside my door. And so there are people that don't have that option, but maybe they can find other options where I talked to someone the other day who said he loves walking around with a Starbucks cup. And so what he decided to do, though, everybody talks about the fact that they spend too much on coffee at Starbucks or Peet's. And so he said, I wanted that feeling, so I went and bought one of their $12 Starbucks reusable cups. And he said, I make my own coffee, so I still have that good feeling with my coffee, with my Starbucks mug. But he said, I'm saving quite a bit of money a month. So from, coffees to cars, there's a lot of things that people can look at and really get in touch with. Am I spending money in ways that really doesn't add to the quality of my life?
Hmm. Karen, you bring up something also that I think is really valuable for our listeners out there when you hear people say, well, I just make barely enough to get by, so I don't really have enough to save. Now, here is a really innovative solution that we had heard from our guests several years ago, and this was an interesting one because it really works, folks. And she says simply that you go out and you have $1 or $5, whatever the case is, and you go out and you purchase something. It could be 25 cents, 50 cents, 80 cents, whatever the case is. Take and you always spend $1 so that you'll get change. And then save your change. You'll be amazed that you always have money to save.
Yes, I know people who have those big jars and those big bowls, and all their change goes into it. And then once in a while they discover, they have a couple $100. And that can be something that goes into savings or something that they've been wanting to do for themselves. So, for people to reward themselves for savings, not by saying, okay, now I'm going to spend all my saving, but just to start looking at even unlimited means. Are there some things that I could do differently where I could start saving money? And you know what the big surprise is?
What's that?
When people have savings, even a small amount, it will shift their relationship to spending money. If people have no savings, it's, why bother? I'm already in a hole. I've seen so many people who thought that I have people do a wants and needs list. And then, you've heard the saying, you can never get enough of what you don't need. So we would always make sure in working on their money that they were first tending to their needs before their wants. And so what people would discover, these things that they had on their list that was on their want list, and it was so important, and they had such a hard time not pulling out that credit card and getting it, once they started building up their savings, it changed their priorities about spending.
They learn to delay, don't they?
They do, because they worked hard to save that, and they don't want it to disappear. And so, everything in the financial recovery process is designed to help people break denial or the financial fog, whatever you want to call it. For me, it was more of a full-blown money coma. but as we wake up and we look at the possibilities, and when people say that they barely make enough money, and there are, my gosh, there is poverty, and there are people just absolutely struggling to make it. And one of the things, so I'm very empathetic to that group of people, the people who've lost their homes and lost their jobs.
Sure, absolutely.
And
especially the ones that were really meaning well. I mean, they knew it was within their budget. We're not talking about the people that were stupid, that were lured by the financial services industry to go out and buy out of their means, homes that they realistically couldn't afford and were lured into doing it. That's just stupid thinking, in my opinion.
Well,
I'm not calling the people stupid. I'm saying it's stupid thinking.
Right. No,
but we're talking about legitimate people where things actually just they happened. It was out of their control in some cases. Yeah.
Well, in my neighborhood, I'm in the country, so our neighbors are far apart. Every home that's been for sale has either been foreclosure or short sale. And
my goodness!
What that's done, but besides the fact that house prices have dropped, what that's done, to the value of my house. And so I really empathize with people in that situation. However, this is a really important concept that I really try when I'm doing workshops or speaking that I try to address with people, and that is a lot of times there's this magical thing, and when you talked about the living up to the Joneses, that's not the way the saying goes.
Which interesting, if you really pay attention to yourself in a very underlying way, we tend to do that. And if you could just see that and go, wait a minute, I'm me. I don't need to be like this. You move in a whole new direction.
Well, and especially if they don't have the income to back that up.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, I'll use an example of a school teacher I know. Loves her life, feels rich because her life is just so fulfilled. And she lives on a school teacher's salary. She doesn't live on a doctor or an attorney's salary. She shops at the places that she can meet her needs, in a way that's appropriate for the amount of money she gets. So, for her work is working for her, and so is her money because she's matched her lifestyle to her profession. And so that's where a lot of the denial can be for people is they're in a lower-paying profession, but they're living as if they're in a higher-paying profession. And so people have to make the decision, I'm either going to look for ways to increase my income if I'm going to have that lifestyle, or I need to adjust my lifestyle to match my income because otherwise there will be dire consequences.
Sure. Now,
that non-financial reward, we always want to look at the financial reward of things. However, in this case of what I was talking about, there's this non-financial reward. Okay, I don't make a lot of money as a school teacher, and I love what I do. This happens to be a PE teacher who's outdoors all the time, and so that's a big thing for all of us to face. I'm getting older, and even though I train people now, and I will probably be training for years, it's definitely a time to realize, okay, things are different than they were, 10 years ago. I don't know how many years I have to work, so it's time for people to really be honest about where they are and where they're headed.
Mm-hmm. I know it wasn't too long ago we had a financial expert coach, if you will, and she was saying it was really interesting as we kind of pursued it. This was many years ago, and she says, you folks are awfully young. Not as a bad thing for pursuing this. She says, that's really good. She says, most of my clients are in their late 50s and into their 60s, and you should see some of the messes that I'm trying to help change when you're that age in life. But what was encouraging about her saying that is these people had made a choice to move in a different direction, and that it's really never too late.
Well, and I'm so glad that your guest said that, because so many people will just be frozen because they feel it's too late.
Right.
They hear the statistics. And, we've all heard...
Part of the social conditioning that we tend to hear from media.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? In 10 years, we're going to be 10 years older, and so we have 10 years. Maybe we're starting at 60, and boy, we can really change how things are if we start today. Otherwise, if we just continue the same old behaviors for another 10 years, it will be much more dire than if we say, I can start now. It doesn't matter how old I am. I can start improving my situation.
Karen, one of the guests we had on our program, interestingly enough, shares that same attitude, and she has dedicated herself, along with a gentleman by the name of Richard Clark. Her name is Mary Buffett, former daughter-in-law of Warren Buffett.
Oh, yes, I know of what she's doing.
Yes, and it's amazing work, and I asked her, I said, well, let's take a look at the reality of what you're talking about here. You know, is it possible for people in their 50s who've lost a lot, or people in their 60s who've lost a lot, to start now with what we're talking about here and make a difference? She says, oh, yeah, it'll be a little bit of work, but it's not like a lot of the nonsense that you're hearing on television, you know, about these cheap, low-rate return on your investment IRA government stupid programs that take you for years. You're going to die before you realize anything there. She says, if you're willing to put in the sweat equity that it takes to learn these basic principles that Warren used, you know, for investing money, when you really pay attention to what he did, I love talking about the guy because I actually read a really great biography on him and realized, you know, if people realize that it does take a little work, but his simple philosophy investing is investing in things that you understand and make sense. He never invested in technology. He doesn't own Microsoft. He owns Coca-Cola. How many of us know what Coca-Cola is? You know, or as the other thing that he would say is him and his business partner Charlie Munger, is they would invest in businesses that a ham sandwich could run.
Well, and you know, I love what she's saying to people, and I love what he's saying about, you know, we want to educate ourselves, you know, discover where those holes are, that things that we don't understand. And what can stop people is if they think, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. But you know, if you start with a little bit each day and say, hey, I'm going to educate myself, and you know, maybe they read Warren Buffett's book, and maybe they look at the work that she's doing, and what are the things they can do? Because otherwise, they're very vulnerable to, you know, perhaps looking at somebody else as the expert. And I'm saying, hey, use the experts. However, prepare yourself so that you're not, hey, they're a god if they succeed for you, and if they don't, then you're a victim. So that you are taking responsibility too, to say, hey, you know, I want to get smart about money, and it can be such an empowering thing. I know the word empowerment is so overused.
Sure it is.
However,
but when you experience it, it's an amazing word.
Pardon me?
I said when you experience it yourself, it's a very, you know, it's a big thing.
I know. And so I can't think of a word to replace it. And thinking about how we feel when we just feel powerless and hopeless, as opposed to feeling, you know what, I'm getting pretty smart with money here. I'm making strong choices. I have this sense that there is enough, and there will be enough, and that I'm enough, and it's a change from the inside out and the outside in.
Karen, you couldn't have brought something up that I think will be probably one of the most valuable issues that we talk about during this segment about financial recovery. For those of you just tuning in, we're talking with Karen McCall. Her book is Financial Recovery, How You Can Begin to Start Today to Take Personal Responsibility to move into the direction that you want to see yourself in. One of the biggest things that I think, or the biggest thing, especially for people that are in their late 20s or into their 30s, 40s, and on, is the shame they feel that they didn't achieve the kind of responsibility when it comes to money that they feel everybody else has. And they end up suppressing that or repressing it, and they do nothing about it but just watch themselves freeze to death in the swimming pool rather than climbing out into the chilly air and grabbing the towel.
Right. Well, I was there, Daniel. You know, that was the thing for me. I felt so much shame. And that's one of the things that I'd say to your listeners is, oh my gosh, you know, we can just beat ourselves up and stay stuck in that sense of it's too late. And that's why I recommend people get support where they have somebody that they're talking to, and they get support moving out of that isolation and that paralysis. And shame is a huge thing. And there's a lot about money and shame that I've always encouraged people to think about. And I think about shame on a couple of levels. There's the level that you were just talking about where, gosh, I should know. How could I be so stupid? How could I be so bad? Everybody else knows that I don't. Where they're just beating themselves up. And then there's the shame that drives a lot of the relationships where people grow up feeling, that sense of, I'm not a worthy person, I'm not of value. And so then they feel they're, as John Bradshaw said, a shame-based person. And so healing the shame is so important, and I have a chapter in my book about that we are not our money, we're not our credit report, and there's so much pressure for people where they feel they're going to be measured by that, and it's very hard for them to tune into what their true value is and what their worthiness is, so that they can start building on that rather than just being paralyzed in their shame. So I have a lot of empathy for people who feel shame about their relationship with money, because I will tell you, I suffered for a lot of years, and I am so grateful, that that day that I came home and there was an eviction notice on my door that said, okay, Karen, now it's time to wake up from the money coma. and I'll tell you, it seemed hopeless, Daniel. I mean, it absolutely seemed hopeless. And it was, one little step at a time. And was it a smooth road, all the way, just, hey, from where I was to a perfect path of recovery? Absolutely not. There were lots of setbacks. But action is the magic word.
It sure is.
It's doing something. We go 3 steps forward and 2 back, and we just take that next 3 steps. However, really focusing on just what is the indicated action? What's just something I can do today? We can also feel overwhelmed with thinking where we are to where we want to be, and it feels like we have such a distance to travel that in and of itself can stop people as well. So if we just focus on, okay, what can I do today? And there were times that I would have to say, hey, today I'm okay. Today I have a roof over my head. Today I have money to eat. And, the goal of having a healthy relationship with money, the benefit of it is that when we're worried about money all the time, it's going to absolutely distract us from the things that we value the most. And so the healthier our relationship with money, we're not so distracted by it then, so that we are living a life that's more meaningful and fulfilling. When I think about some experiences I've had recently, they've had nothing to do with money, and I left a family party the other day. I just felt so wonderful and full of just, being around my family, and maybe everyone doesn't have that experience. And then just sitting out and having dinner with folks the other night after a workshop outside, and having a very inexpensive dinner, but sharing 2 hours of conversation. So that's what we're looking for, or what are the things that we value? And for a lot of us, it's those connections with people and that sense that we're hopefully making some kind of a contribution in the world. And it's very hard to focus on our values when we're so worried and mired in money problems.
Karen, I think also what our listeners should also come to understand is, let's say that you've put yourself into what could seem or perceive from others to be a really embarrassing, shameful situation in your relationship with money. And here's, I think, a key, and probably you may have discovered this on your own as you began to say, I'm going to have the courage to face where I'm at, and I'm going to certainly use the strength and the will and the focus to get to where I want to be. And that is that we tend to think, when we're feeling ashamed of how we've stewarded our relationship with money, that I am going to be judged by all of my peers and everyone around me about where I'm at. And the fact is, I'll bet you that if you share your story, if you're willing to have the courage to open up and say, yes, I did this. Yes, I made these choices, and this is where I'm at as a result of these choices, you'll be surprised, and I believe this is true, that most of the people around you feel exactly the same way.
I believe it's true as well, and you've made a really, really good point, is that
you have a chance to inspire.
Well, and also, if we just have it as a secret and we think, that our friends, nobody knows the truth about us, it's hard to really take in any validation that, if someone says, hey, you're a great person and a great friend, the thought's going to be, oh, yeah, but if you only knew.
Right.
And so there's another risk in Now, are we going to tell everyone? Are we going to go out and announce it to the world? Well, I do, because this is my work. But
Right.
everyone's not going to. And we want to find safe people to confide in, people that are not going to be shaming or judgmental. And perhaps other people, like you said, a lot of people will identify. And it's not a popular topic around the water cooler. But you're right. You know, oh my gosh, I remember for years not dating because I just felt so much shame about my situation with money. And then when I did start dating, it was, you know, if I kept this as a secret, I would never know if this person valued me for me or just what they perceived my success to be. And so you're absolutely right. It not only helps us realize we're not alone, but it gives us that validation that we are valued and cared about regardless of what our financial situation is like.
Karen, believe it or not, I did the same thing you did.
Oh.
I remember actually doing a segment, and this was probably 12, 15 years ago, where it was talking about, finding your soulmate. And I said, well, one of the things I brought up, and it was in the back of my mind, and I said, well, there may be some things you might not want to share because they're embarrassing, and that was the thing to me that was embarrassing.
Right.
And to hear you say that, I go, well, listen to this. Somebody who just didn't date because they were embarrassed about their financial situation. It's interesting.
I did a workshop last Saturday, and there were 2 men there who do not date for that reason.
My goodness.
They do not date because, and so, of course, that was a great topic in the workshop, and there were a lot of women who said, hey, a lot of women pay their own way. And
well, with men, though, it's different, and I think you would agree, because we've been set in the standard that we're supposed to pay and take care of things. That's just how it is, but it's not really the reality this day and age.
No. However, even though I had very few male relatives who were really taking care of their families, and most of the women worked as well, and in some cases they were the only ones who worked. But I remember the summer between 4th grade and 5th grade being so afraid to go to school that I wasn't smart enough, and I felt sorry for guys. I felt sorry for you guys because you were the ones who had to be smart enough to get through school and go out and make a living. And where did that come from? It was just kind of in the air, and that was a lot of years ago. And boy, it is just this message that men are supposed to take care of women and women are supposed to be taken care of. We know there's been tons and tons of change in that, but that's still pretty pervasive in our society. And so my heart went out to these guys, and we had opportunities to really explore how they can have social lives and how they can, talk about it, and rather than depriving themselves of companionship and intimacy. So I'm really glad you I guess I brought it up and then you responded to it, so thank you.
Yes, Ben, listen out there. Don't be embarrassed because you screwed up with money. That's okay. We're saying get out there and date, get that skeleton out of the closet, because it's the first courageous step you can make toward moving into the direction that you want to go.
They say we're as sick as our secrets.
Well, that's true. They don't help. Now, Karen, I understand that you are the founder of what's known as the Financial Recovery Institute. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I started, over 20 years ago, after struggling with my own money stuff, realizing there were a lot of people like me. And so for 20 years, I had a private practice working with people who have challenges with money.
So now you have a career.
Well, except I no longer do that because I always had a waiting list. I was so busy, and I realized that there were a lot of people. There were people in this workshop that I was saying, I wish I would have known there was a service like yours. This approach to financial recovery that's non-shaming and really helps people get smart with money as well as look at the emotional. And so then I started training people, and that's my focus now, is training people around the country who want to be financial recovery counselors. However, I also like to help people who want to improve their relationships. So, yes, I have the book that's for sale now, but on my website I also have a free ebook, How to Write a Money Autobiography, that can help people look at how they develop their belief systems and attitudes. I do a regular blog, so part of my vision is bringing this out in the open for people and having it be a topic where people go and know that there's hope and that they can get help. So that's pretty much what I do. I recommend if people want help, they go to financialrecovery.com and look at the resources we have, look at the free things that we have. And I also highly recommend my book because it really is the full process that I would take people through.
So as Karen's saying to the listeners out there, she can help you be the change that you wish to see.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of stories of, people who have turned their financial life around, and I think that's one of the things we want is that message of hope, because it's so easy to feel hopeless and then paralyzed. Agreed.
Now, Karen, could you give out that website for us?
Yes, it's financialrecovery.com, www.financialrecovery.com, all one word.
And that is also the title of the book, folks, Financial Recovery, Developing a Healthy Relationship with Money. Karen McCall, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
It's been lovely talking with you. I've really enjoyed it, Daniel. Thanks a lot.
You betcha.
Okay. Have a great day.
We also want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Be sure to visit us at our website. We'll have a hot link there as well, especially on our blog. That is beyond50radio.com, the number 5050. And also sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past.